good development of financial literacy. Yesterday we talked about at the round table with IMF about financial inclusivity. Financial literacy is one of the aspects of engagement in the stock market. And retail investors impact the market trends. And if investment is accessible all over the world, becoming more and more accessible, the trend that we have at the capital markets, the same as in Kazakhstan, we see that retail investors have access to information. We are all information services consumers. And brokers provide remote access for investing in stock markets, including those tools that are provided by Freedom Finance and Securities Center. We can see that all over the world, transaction costs are going down due to technology's involvement. That's why capital markets becoming more and more accessible. And mobile trading helps us to make immediate investment decisions. And we can see that the entrance fee is going down. The entrance to the investment funds or for trading. Retail market is quite big all over the world. If we look at the most developed markets where the culture of retail investment has been long, we can see that there is a contribution to the economy not only through investing of people into different tools. In the US, 43 million of households have either broker or pension funds. 56 million households participate at least in one mutual fund. Investment consultants and brokers service this retail market. So this is also development of adjacent industries. That's what we see in Kazakhstan. We have a large bank and insurance sector, and the more they develop, the more stock market is developed, the more people get engaged as employers or participants. That's why the contribution to GDP is growing of the financial sector. Let's look at the developing countries. In developed countries, for example, in the US, European Union, 60%, from 40 to 60%. Then in developing countries, this is not reaching 10%. Here are a few examples. In Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, young people, or people from 18 to 64 years take only 1%, account for 1% of the total investors. If we look at the share of securities investments in private savings, that can be deposits or cash, the share of investment in stock in Russia is 16%, in Russia 15%. And we can see that this is a growing trend. In recent 12 years, that's been growing. Here is the graph showing that. Speaking about Kazakhstan, through the central depository, 119,000 accounts have access to stock market. This share has grown through holding people's IPOs, and the number of participants has increased. In 2011, there were 10,000 accounts, and there was a breakthrough because of Kaztransoil IPO and Kigok IPOs, and this is still growing due to private IPOs. And the participation of retail investments is different investors. This retail investors participate at the equities market, and the share is about 50% there. 119,000 accounts are open, but active accounts grew from 5,000 500 to, so active are 6,000, but these which do transactions at least once a year with transactions and bonds. And of course, investors are interested in liquid shares, Castrans Oil, People Saving Bank, Gas Minerals, those who are highly liquid shares. What CASE is doing, it is well known, but we are a stock exchange. We are promoting stock market because we need to improve financial literacy. We do lots of activities and trainings and promote the best practices and how to protect investors' interests. Explain. What we think should be done in Kazakhstan to increase the share of retail investors. We need to use more advanced technologies and to have a higher level of financial literacy.
The bigger the share of middle class, the more the opportunities we have in the stock market. Of course, the support of state, we have some benefits. We need to offer more understandable, easy instruments. We have broker organizations which serve as those consultants. So this is the presentation. I would like to get to the questions maybe, so our participants could share their experience, how they see retail investor in Kazakhstan and how it can increase the share of those investors. Maybe I will get to questions. Maybe I'll start with Janat. So that's the question. How do you see retail investors in economy? What about the regulations? What about the actions of state officials in the stock market? Thank you very much for the question. We had a presentation, and the share of retail investors in the United States is very high, but still, these are investors which have broker account or retirement account. As a matter of fact, the situation in Kazakhstan is far better. We have more than 10 million retirement accounts, so almost all population of Kazakhstan is a retail investor, but it's not really true. Under the term retail investor, we think about people who voluntarily give money to stock market. Then the second aspect about retail investor, if the retail investor goes to investor market, he's less professional. So retail investor prefers to invest collectively. Some joint funds, some retirement funds. So these types of investments are less costly for retail investor, less expensive, and more predictable in terms of investments. When investor takes on risks and he bears big risks, there is some behavioral mechanism, so retail investor loses versus professional investor. The third aspect that I would like to talk about is that in developed countries, national investors, they are portfolio investors. They cannot buy big shares in a company. There are some limitations, but retail investor could buy a small share in a company, in a fastly growing company. These investments can bring good dividends. We don't have this kind of emittance. Speaking of retail investments, we need to develop collective investments, different funds, joint funds, where where you can feel protected when it comes to retail investors. This is about the future of retail investors. Many questions have already been raised. This is not the question only about the shifting responsibility to regulators, because in developed countries, as a rule, regulation is done not only by regulators, but there is quasi-regulator. Stock market is a quasi-regulator. Some listing question, access to the market, disclosure of information is decided by the stock market. Many issues regarding protection of investors, deposits, these kind of systems are not done by the regulators, but by the infrastructure. So in terms of development of regulation, it has to involve all aspects: state regulation, quasi-state regulation, self-regulation. And if we work on all fronts, we can create a very good regulation system, and it will be more liberal, more applicable than what we have now in Kazakhstan, because the focus is on the development of market goes towards the regulators for some reason. Thank you very much for your answer. So we encourage our panelists to speak openly about these issues. I wanted to ask you, do you think we need retail investors? Do we need their funds to finance our economy? What's the potential there? How is the development of retail investors affect resources for business? I will try to explain in general. How to understand the role of retail investor. We need to speak about cash flow. The banks themselves, they provide main flow of economy. We associate this cash flow with anatomically. We look at it anatomically. So it's like the main artery. These finances, but there are also resources that is provided by the legal entities and individuals. Legal entities, but they, compared to the banking system, they take on risks. There are some losses. It's absorbed at the level of investor, but banks, for example, they accumulate and they get to bankruptcy with its own consequences. So he absorbs risks and lets the economy develop steadily. Potential of retail investors is far less than the legal entities, and it's less institutionalized. But in general, speaking of the numbers, this year GDP will be 60 trillion tenge. It's 18, 19 trillion tenge. But officially, only 8 trillion tenge was shown. Then it's the shadow labor force. So it affects how retail investors, how they participate in investors. If the income, it is hard to legalize. This is a question about tax authority, how to get this out of the shadows. And then population will be more active investing through official sources. Also, there's another detail. Our fund, labor fund, is 30% from GDP in the United States that we refer to. They have a lot of retail investors. Their labor share 60-65%. So if we distribute GDP correctly in favor of population, it will increase the activity of citizens in investments. Also, I said 18, 19 trillion, 10 trillion that are in the shadows. We need to understand that given the different numbers, it's not distributed equally among population. Some people get more, and unfortunately, opportunity to measure that it's difficult. So we need to use intuitively. We should go intuitively. 8 trillion that were officially registered. The share of population who get more than 50,000 tenge, it's only 3%. If we draw analogy with the shadow part of this business, only a few people get more than 500,000. So this number will be 11 million of economically active citizens. 7 million have active. So out of those 7 million, it's 3%, 200,000 people. Then 120,000 individual entrepreneurs. So we look at this number, 300,000. So some individual entrepreneurs have weaker positions. Potentially, so those who have potential for retail investments, I think it's half, about 150,000 people. Freedom Finance, if we can accumulate 150,000 to get, so it's 1/3 of the maximum amount of the market of retail investments. These are rough estimations. We need to go deeper, because the official statistics doesn't allow us to do deeper evaluation. So that's the picture in general. Well, it's kind of pessimistic picture. These are the facts, yes? So you say 150,000 potential retail investors. If we have 1% of the population, so Russia probably has 2% of the population. So as you say, we opened 119,000 accounts. So 150,000 means that we have not covered everyone. So we are discussing whether we need people in the economy and how to make people richer, how to attract them to stock market. That's what I wanted just to continue. About 150,000, it's a small amount, but there are reasons for that. But I mean the part of the population which has more than 10,000 $10,000 to invest. And those who want to buy 1 share, 2 share, 1,000, 2,000 tenge, there are, of course, more potential retail investors. I mean the economic aspect. The savings, for example, household savings. It means a family or a individual. So we need to increase that share. Do you think it's important for them to participate in the market? We need to increase that, of course, when individuals don't take part in the official turnover. They keep money under their mattresses, of course. So this phenomena, when money stays there, it means like some blockage in the veins, in the arteries. So the lesser the amount under the mattress, the better. So, Timur, in Kazakhstan, maybe in other countries, but in Kazakhstan, it's only 150,000 according to estimation. So how do you understand the such small amount? So to not encourage people to have a different position. On the one hand, I will agree with the estimation that this is the most preferred audience. They have some savings, amount of savings, they have some amount of education. This is the group that we are targeting, of course, when we want to estimate the market size. So it's very close to 150,000. It's not the retail, it's the core of the retail. Among my clients, 50,000 clients, 50, 55, there are people among the core, from the core, some people outside this core. So it's not 30%. If you look at the whole market, I, I'm, I'm sure that there are many accounts in the market that we cannot include in the core. We still have a lot of accounts which have less than 1 million tenge. One of the thoughts that come to mind and potentially difficult to realize is how can we increase the well-being of people, how to make our population richer so that we can increase more people with savings. The solution looks simple, but on the other hand, it's in practice it's difficult. The switch that regulates the money that goes to private sector and that goes to state sector in like our countries, like many resources, many resource economy, it's the currency. The weaker the currency, the more resources they have in their hands, the less resources will be in the private sector. The devaluation that we suffered due to objective circumstances in trade with Russia that fell with regards to oil, and it affected negatively, of course, according to average paycheck. It affected average paycheck of citizens. We didn't have other alternative, but the idea that we need to increase the production of labor, our currency needs to be stronger. This is a key to increase of credibility and well-being, though it's hard to increase the well-being just by changing the currency by 150. Well, National Bank could do that, but according to my estimations, the gold reserves that the National Bank has, the volume of liquidity is so high that the government could set any currency within reasonable limits, even 150, but this would not lead to any real production of labor. It would even be worse. That's why we need to do it not artificially, but do it in a natural method without stimulating it. Do everything what depends like on us as a players of the market to have more trust, to have more credibility, so that we could trust our banks, our financial institutions, and this is a very important social task that cannot be solved only by one party. We all should come to an agreement, regulators, banks, banking community, and we need to stop that. We need to stop that if we want to become richer and richer, if we want to keep our financial independence, if we want to keep our sovereignty, we need to a working banking system, and we need to stop searching for the next one who will go to the market. It's a very dangerous game and destructive game so we have a lot of places in our banking system and we have competition in the banking area. We have place for competition in the broker sphere. For the investors, to come to the market, the potential is not used. 150,000 people, all of them are not yet investors. 80% are not investors according to my estimations. And these 80%, we need to give them certain instruments. We need to do it so that they could trust, but we should offer them income, revenue, so that they would come. If there is no profit, if there are no interesting things for them, it's pointless to build any infrastructure. If we don't have interesting investment opportunities, of course, when we have high economic level, we have more opportunities than when we have low economic level.
We don't have interesting issues because we don't have investor base. And this is, we don't know which comes first. It's like egg and the chicken. But on behalf of retail, everything is not so bad. 1% here in Russia, 2% in Kazakhstan. It's 1%. Kazakhstan is the second in CIS countries on developing the financial market. And during the 10 years, we made a great step forward. We have moved forward in developing the infrastructure. Our market is quite technologically developed. It has good regulation. We can still improve it, but on behalf of the organization of the internal Kazakhstan market, many things are already done quite well. And we have already achieved good penetration, not so small, and it will be growing as there will be more people's IPO taking place and more companies coming to market. My investment bankers, after a big break last year, are now coming back. We are now looking at 5-6 issuers. We have companies who are interested in attracting capital to the stock exchange. That's a hard process, but they are there. And we have investors who have dozens of millions of dollars. So we'll get back to that. So I would like to so, 150,000, we are not there. How can we get engaged? How all of us can become retail investors? Or we should go through the pension fund. So you said that you have some rich investors, but those who have little money, how they can get engaged? Of course they can. Out of those 50,000, the core of them is about 15,000. The rest are those who have about less than 1 million tenge on account. And what's the minimum? Minimum is a few thousand of tenge. Okay, what can you buy for 1,000 tenge? Okay. Robert, can we get to you? Robert, it's clear that with such numbers and 60% of, compared to the US, 60% of retail investors, but how the US got to those 60% of retail investors? What was done there in the US? From your experience, maybe not only US, maybe other countries, but you are our international expert today. So what can be done to increase the share of retail investors? What are the stimulating factors? What should be the broker's behavior, government behavior? Could you share that, please?
Just, I'm going to answer in English. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for the question and for chairing the panel. Thank you to Timur and to Freedom for including me on this panel. I think this is a very important discussion for a lot of reasons, because the retail investor base, and I'm going to put the U.S. hat on. I'm not going to make this a U.S.-centric discussion, but the reality is, in many instances, the retail investor is the lifeblood and the engine for capital formation and for IPOs in the small and medium enterprises, in particular, in the United States. They play a very key role in capital formation, and frankly, I believe have given the opportunity for many global companies that may or may not have been successful in their IPO if not were for the contribution or the money that was given to them through the retail investors. I'll use a company that went public in 1980 that everyone knows, that the offering was pretty much 100% retail. It was a company by the name of Apple in 1980. So, and when the retail investor puts money into these types of companies, it really, frankly, creates a virtuous cycle for all of the capital markets, companies, and investors that are involved in this situation. The company is given the money that they raise in their IPO to go out and build and grow and develop their business. Maybe institutions in 1980 didn't want to invest in a computer company named Apple, and that's what happened. So it was mostly a retail offering. So Apple gets the money, and the rest is history 40 years later, and we know where Apple is today. The investor, at the end of the day, the ones who held Apple obviously have made a tremendous amount of money. And even if they sold it along the way, more than likely they made good money. So to Timur's point, and I think he alluded to this, even if it's a small investment for a retail investor, and let's just take a look at, say, Amazon, for example. The people that put just $1,000, which is not obviously a tremendous amount of money, in 1998 when Amazon went public, and if they held that stock today, the valuation of that stock is about $1.5 million for a $1,000 investment. So tremendous wealth creation is created, and again, that helps the virtuous cycle. That stimulates the economy. That middle-class person that maybe can only put a couple of $1,000s into it, a few years later creates so much wealth that money gets put back and stimulated into the economy. The capital markets get stimulated by this money coming in. More companies come public in the market, and as these companies grow and go public, it helps create capital formation. And again, all of these things collectively coming together, I think helps create a vibrant economy overall. And I think when you're looking at retail investors, I think the retail boom in the United States, frankly, did not happen until about 1975. I mean, certainly there was always retail involved in IPOs along the way, but up until then, you only had, frankly, the New York Stock Exchange, which was only for a very exclusive club of very large companies. When NASDAQ was created in 1975, it actually created a platform and a marketplace for entrepreneurial or small and mid-sized companies to go public. And from there, the retail base really exploded, through the 80s and all of and certainly the 90s with all of the tech boom, the dot-com boom, and all of those companies that went public. Certainly not every small, medium enterprise or IPO is going to be Apple or Amazon, but if you participate, I believe, in enough over the course of time, I think the retail investor, I think has been proven over the course of time in the US, has done very well on a rate-adjusted return over the course of time.
Роберт, спасибо. Вот вы озвучили важную именно экономическую роль все-таки нашего участия.
Robert, thank you very much. You have said what is the important role of people, that they provide capital. And it's all very interesting that you said that in the US it happens since 1975. It's not even 50 years that retail investors have been clearly growing. But why people decided to get into the market? Interesting proposals or the mindset? Because we are also talking here that we need to be more active in investing. We should protect minority investors. But in the US, I think it's still there. But what clicked? What was the driving force for people to get to the stock market?
You touched on some things in the question that I think that are very interesting as part of the answer here. The role of investor education and investor protection and disclosure and transparency. I think what's happened, and sure and I think in every marketplace, regardless of where you are in the world, whether you're in Kazakhstan, China, or the United States, there's always going to be bad actors and bad apples in that equation, but that's very few and far between. The infrastructure is such that, and especially in the current generation, the last 20 years of retail investment in the United States, where technology has really taken over, where the retail investor, frankly, today is on the same platform and plateau as an institutional investor, because everyone has access to the same type of information with all of the Twitters and the financial portals and the Bloomberg terminals and wherever you're accessing your information, people have access to that same information at the same time. That wasn't the case in the United States 20 or 30 years ago, where the large pensions or institutional investors would get the first look. A lot of the rules and regulations were changed during that period of time, where trading rules are very protective, for retail investors. From a regulatory perspective, the SEC, which is the main regulatory body, and FINRA, which is the broker-dealer regulatory body in the United States, have put in tremendous investor protection measures. So if there ever is an issue, if there is ever a complaint, there is a judicious system that would alleviate any issues with any problem with a trade. So from that aspect, and frankly, the exchanges, as I alluded to, I've been in capital markets for 30 years. I worked in senior positions within the New York Stock Exchange and the American Stock Exchange for the better part of 12 years. The exchanges do a tremendous job, and I'm sure your exchange does as well here in Kazakhstan. It's critically important. The most important thing that a regulatory body and all of the stakeholders involved, stock exchange included, is investor protection. That's the most important thing that you have to do, because if you create a infrastructure and a marketplace such that the retail investor is comfortable, has access to the information, has the appropriate transparency and appropriate disclosures, if there is any issue, they have potential recourse through the regulatory bodies, and that we heard correctly. I think once you have that in place, and I think in the U.S. that is really in place very well. I know there's some trade organizations on this panel. There's many trade organizations also in the U.S. that I think are very retail investor-centric, that protect that investor base. And if you have that combined with the capital formation and the capital markets, I think it really helps potentially drive the potential investor to maybe put more money into the stock market. And that doesn't have to be an individual stock either, right? It could be, I know on this panel, it could be a mutual fund, it could be an exchange-traded fund, it could be a lot of other things. People have different risk profiles. Not everyone wants to buy Amazon. And there's a lot of other investment types and investment vehicles that are, I think, frankly, very present in the United States that may not be as present here in this market. As you develop your capital markets and your capital formation and your market grows, I'm sure a lot more of those products are going to come into this market. And once that does, and you do the appropriate investor education around those products and services, I think that only enhances the ability here in the local market in Kazakhstan to further penetrate and further develop the retail investor base. Because I really do firmly believe in my 30 years of doing this, the retail investor at the end of the day is really a major driver in capital formation and capital markets.
Thank you. Ну, я вот хотела перейти к Даниэру. Миллионов казахстанцев.
Daniyar, you have a very big role to play. 150,000 are rich out of Kazakhstan population, but each of us have 1,000 tenge, and potentially we could invest it somewhere. So could you tell us? Then we also heard that we should be active. You have created an association of protecting minority investors' rights. So what should be done so that all of us have at least one share? What do you think? Good afternoon. I am a retail investor. Thank you for this opportunity to talk here. This is a certificate that we've just received on April 23rd for AIFC. We decided to check what is the English law in Kazakhstan. We don't know what this will lead to, but we started to try this. Now, talking about retail investors and their role. In Kazakhstan, yes, we have some people, not so many. They don't have issues with real estate, but they have savings, quite good savings, and they are not happy with the deficit of instruments. Can be a deposit or in retail or real estate. But we now understand the risks of these instruments. And the apartment is actually can depreciate in value, and stagnation can take a long time. So we have the class of investors in Kazakhstan, and that's why freedom finance has been growing in recent years. Freedom finance came actually when when it was really needed by people. Talking about the association. So we are three founders of the association, and we hope that we will have many more people, thousands of people that you mentioned here.
And some cases that encouraged us to start this association. There were some violations for minority. There are some disputes with Kazakh Telecom, some oil production cases, those gray stories, as we call them, that encouraged us to create this association. About the role of retail investments, from 2006, I entered the market. I introduced myself to the Kazakh Telecom IPOs, and I earned some money in a few months. So I want to say that retail investors, they create liquidity in terms of securities, because if you look only at institutionalized investors, they are there for the long run, and you would not see the share. And retail investors, they create liquidity. So there are always some suggestions, some offers. So it's a symbiosis between institutionalized investor and retail investor. There's some demand, and in the retail there's also interest, and there's also some offer of shares. I also would want to talk about the problems of development of stock market of Kazakhstan, if I could. There are a range of problems for the development of stock market of Kazakhstan. Well, I can start with a positive thing. For the past several years, more than 100,000, I think 115,000 of accounts opened thanks to IPO of big companies, Kazkhstan's and other companies. So people now realizing that investment into shares is a good thing, because housewife, maybe she doesn't know what BTA is, what free cash flow, ROE, ROI, difficult complex terms, fundamental analysis, technical analysis. But if in November last year shares of Kazkhstan Oil were 4,000, now they're 5,600. It's not difficult to persuade a housewife to take part in investments. So the first problem is low liquidity of stock market. I'm telling this as an investor. If you look at trade terminal, you will see years of retail investors. There will be some applications, some requests for 1 million tenge maybe, and this is all from Freedom Finance, because Freedom Finance, it's a significant factor that creates liquidity in our market, because there are no other investments. Well, there are different other broker companies. Retail investors, they create liquidity. So low liquidity is the reason, because we don't have institutionalized investors. We have a retirement fund, and the people don't have any choice. They know as an investor, and he is the buyer of those securities, and he is the biggest seller. So it's the market of one purchaser. So we need to talk about this, because in January I know there was a presentation of National Bank how this problem can be solved. Maybe give the right to the people who invested in their retirement funds. Maybe they can affect their money. The second biggest problem is the deficit of interesting emittents. Let's look at, I write my thesis in 1998. Regulation of securities was my topic, and I think in 96 was the first bill passed. Can I say this word? Can I say Kajageldin at this event was 1997? In 1997, it was the bill about the blue chips, and let's look at how many years have passed since then. If we look at Kazakh Telecom, that didn't have IPO, in December they had 5%. So only 5 emittents for 23 years. And please take note that we're not talking about the offers that would be interesting for foreign investors. 10-15%. There's no interest from foreign investors. They don't look at that. That's the second problem that is present. So the deficit that we have. I hope that this situation will move in a positive direction, and the line of people for IPO will continue. I mean, the companies. And the third problem is the absence of transparency of corporate sector. It pays actually to be not transparent. So to be transparent, you need to disclose your information, to listen to their opinions, answer some uncomfortable questions. That's the third problem that we have. For national companies, we need to create some measures so they would not be public companies. It would be good if shares in the public companies, the salaries would be higher than in non-public companies. And the KPI would be based on the capitalization. For example, capitalization got higher, and he will have bigger bonuses. If the capitalization of the company is low, then it's the problem of the management, and the minority owners will decide. That's what I wanted to talk about. Thank you very much. You touched on many different topics, so I don't even know who to go to for the next question. Maybe I'll just. We're not going to talk about other things. Let's. Do you see? With even little share, small share of money, you can invest. But Freedom Finance will talk how to do that. So to increase financial literacy, investment activity, give part of the funds for investments, give to people who have retirement funds so they can control their funds. Do you see this as a possibility in the future? First, about National Pension Fund. In National Pension Fund, there's an indicator voluntary savings. In 2013, we had around 12,000 people. Now there are more. So this is the potential of voluntary investments that you could measure. So as for give people the control over their pension fund, I think this is we should do that to give some part of people to control, so he feels credibility towards the national fund. In Singapore, this is the principle is being realized now. They have their own pension fund, but the population is given some part of the money to control. Now they give one amount. If he controlled well, they increase the limits, increase the amount of instruments. He gets more risk. So a lot of people, they don't control it very well, so they let the fund control their money. But those people who can control well, the pension fund actually goes to those people and kind of hires those people. They think if he can control assets well, maybe we can give him more assets. It's a indirect recruitment for them. In general, that's the instrument that we should incorporate. Also, how to spark interest among consumers for investments. Tanyar touched on many different things. I'd like to add up on that. We refer to United States with the highest share of people who are engaged in stock market. This country, the first generation, it's the people who came from different continents and were ready to risk. So this culture of risk, it still continues into now, and it helps. It shapes people's readiness to invest. There are also 2 points that we could copy from them maybe. The first is that the process of investment is very actively started in the end of 19th century. The readiness for investments starts after a certain amount of income. In the end of 19th century, they had people ready to save money and to invest. Now we have some problems because people don't have the right amount of money, right amount of income. Then the fair judicial system. If people don't have trust, they will have restraints, will have cover, hide their incomes. But as soon as there is a trust to the judicial system, even if people invest somewhere, they can also restore the fairness. So until we don't do that. We cannot. But actually, we rank first in terms of protection of our investors, aren't we? Okay, Timur, you. What do you think? What can we offer an investor so that he participates? What do you do to increase the financial literacy? In United States, there are investment consultants. What kind of instruments do you offer that could eliminate the risks? Robert, for example, said that people were raised like this on that way. If the retail investor, of course, he takes on some risks. There were some successful IPOs. So how do you see these IPOs? Are they still attractive? What IPO companies should do to keep working with the citizens? The world practices tell us investors make money if the company becomes richer, more expensive. There are no other ways to increase investor attractiveness. And in that case, if our economy is growing, if we have effective business that the, in which he needs the capital to work with, investors will come to find $100 million from private investors in current condition is a real task. Now we passed some stages, initial stages. Some private investments that we have, they're ready to give average amount of IPO. Average, it's over $100 million. $100 million, maybe some big blue chips that don't go to the market every day will multi-billion capitalization. Even our retail investments, potentially, they could invest hundreds of millions of dollars, and we have the infrastructure and people know about these opportunities. We just need to give them the opportunities that they believe in so that people will think, yes, you could make money here, and then they made money. So it's very important. When all of our IPOs, all of our arrows, this quantity jumps, when they were offered, when the Samruk company was selling at low prices the shares, the securities, Kastransoil, Kigok, they gathered so many people. Also, for the reason they allowed those people to make money, and people made money, even though we passed through a very difficult period of banking crisis. We went through two devaluations. People were still satisfied with their investments. And this is the main thing. We need these kinds of ideas. And the IPOs that the country is planning right now, we need to understand that privatization is not a problem. As the speaker said before, as Al just said in his speech from 1997, we don't have many companies that went public, even though there are rules still, because management of these companies is very high quality, and it resists because management doesn't want to go public because it's uncomfortable. It's good to have one shareholder, no board of directors, independent directors, rather than have a lot of independent directors. Any manager it would be easy to control company. That's why management They are resisting this process. For them, it's good. For us, it's not good. And we can win a lot if the companies don't don't go this way. Not how to sell more, how to sell maximally to maximally narrow amount of problem investors, to pension fund some package, to a couple London big banks that will participate in that. 100 million can be attracted in different ways. If it's an interesting company, it's not a problem to find demand. You can sell IPO to one London fund, but how big Western companies work, they do mix of investors. They, if you want to do your job well, you will not allow that all IPO goes into one hands, that it goes to narrow organizations. You will mix retail investors, a couple of hundreds, better a couple of hundreds. So you have some insurance companies, you have some different pension funds, and it's clear that it's cheaper to do it. You made 5 calls. Some institutions, they already know everything before. They come, they say, we want these shares. So instead of giving the shares and close IPOs, you go fly across 16 branches across the country, and you perform in terms of retail so that IPO goes into thousands of hands, because he has because retail is bad. Because if you want to do retail, you should pay. Retail distribution is the most expensive, but it gives up for the capital to develop. If you say that this budget of IPO is 0.5% or 0.1% from, we will not get any quality distribution, and the country loses because we don't get developed market of capital. So this statement that I wanted to share, and which it's important for the, in terms of, in light of privatization that our country is going through, and that could help our market and give very critical push so that we get good investors, foundation investors base, so that people can make some money, and all the most attractive assets that Samruk Kazanov Fund has. So they shouldn't go to London, they should stay here, because it would facilitate the development market in Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Timur. I would like to say we at Stock Exchange fully support that, and we have showed the dynamics of trades. And yeah, liquidity actually is done by the retail investors, and the broader the retail base, and the broader the choice of shares that can be easily understood by any Kazakhstan citizen, so the more liquidity we will have and more interesting instruments. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I would like just to have a few questions. And the last question I would like to ask Robert. When we were preparing this session, we read an interesting research. So what we see when we talk about base things, we say that we need to protect the investors' right, and we need to have the literacy, and but still shares for millennials. These are young people from 11 to 30 years old. For them, that's an outdated instrument. More and more young people, and in Kazakhstan we have a lot of youth share, and there are people who already invest. They look at cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, gold as the basic instrument. Do you see this as a trend, as what we should be afraid of? Or this is just, I don't know, in fashion now?
Yeah, with respect to cryptocurrency, or if you've heard the term ICOs, initial coin offerings, STO, security token offerings, they've become a fad. I think they're a fad, quite honestly. They're very synthetic, which means they're hard to track, and most of the times they're not affiliated with the established company. Even in the U.S., there's been a tremendous amount of fraud in that space. The stock exchanges in the United States have steered clear of any type of cryptocurrency ICO offerings. There are, closet exchanges around the world that are trying to promote this, but my take is that it's a fad, and I think you should be very careful if you're thinking about it. For the youth out there thinking about investing, I think in the U.S., there's cheap mechanisms for people to invest actually in stocks. I have a 21-year-old son that uses a program called Robinhood. It's a free trading service. So if he comes home with a paycheck of $300 or $400 and wants to put $100 or $200 and buy a couple of shares of Amazon or Apple or buy an exchange-traded fund, he could do so. So that doesn't have to be a large amount of money, but over the course of time, especially if you pick the right opportunities, you could create wealth for yourself. And I think that's the way I think you would have to look at it. Crypto, Bitcoin, I don't have a strong opinion there. I personally would never go anywhere near any of it. When they became very popular, these ICOs a couple of years ago in the US, because I worked at the exchange and I have a consulting firm, I frankly took a close look at them. I met with many management teams that wanted to do these offerings, and I never, ever was in a position to feel comfortable about them. So I would really proceed with very extreme caution, because there's no regulator that's going to protect you at the end of the day. It's not under any federal, any SEC mandate, so you have to be super careful with the cryptocurrencies. So my take is stay clear. There's a lot of other opportunities in the whole world to invest as opposed to going into crypto and Bitcoin. I know a lot of people made a lot of money, but I think that could disappear very quickly for people.
Thank you, Robert. Я думаю,
Thank you, Robert. I think we talked a lot about different things, but we haven't talked about the protection of investors' rights. We, again, should say that any investment is a risk. For any investment, you should have cash available. Now I would like the audience to propose to ask questions. Please. Microphone, please use microphone. So the question about manipulations at our Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, we as retail investors, we can see that there are some manipulations regarding some shares. Do you take any measures? Do you do any investigations? Why you never say what were results? Did you fine anybody? What are their sanctions? Because we know what happened to Kazakh Telecom with BCC. We know their behavior, and we decided to stop trading at Kazakhstan Stock Exchange and go abroad. These are my friends, investors, who do this. And the second thing about financial literacy. Our neighbor, Russia, has recently arranged an Institute of Financial Consultants. Do you think this can be useful for Kazakhstan, for independent financial consultants? Thank you. I will tell you about the manipulations. And Timur, would you answer about financial consultants? Well, we have a law on securities market, and we should do the monitoring. But the information on the monitoring results we provided to the National Bank. And there are some criteria for our monitoring. If we have a reason to suspect that there was some manipulation of brokers or investors that actually led to great increase in the share value or decrease. In Kazakhstan, I would say this tool is less effective because our market is not that liquid. The second drawback of Kazakhstan, this is the inside insider trading is really hard to track down. We have a lack of number of dealings, transactions. If the transactions are very rare, it's really hard to understand why the price changes it inside or not. But with the improvement of liquidity, we have about 20 tools at the stock exchange that are highly liquid, and on them we are closely monitoring and do the investigations and take the measures. But what measures? This is done by the national bank. It's not the stock exchange. We don't have these competencies. We can only get them away from the trades. And financial consultants, Timur, just one word. The National Bank website publishes all the information, including the administrative fines for manipulations. They are published there as well. So this is quite open information. But I may suppose that I understand very well that very often many people define very differently the word manipulation. What do we see as manipulation? The price can deviate. If somebody can buy a lot or sell a lot, the price can go up or can down. And what is manipulation? Manipulation is some confusing activities or inflicting damage on somebody. So the definitions are important. What do we think is manipulation? As for financial consultants, yes, we've been working in Russia with the regulator when we were developing the draft law. And our company is now working with the financial consultants there who are becoming consultants due to this new law. And I think that's good. But that's quite a complicated tool so far, because financial consultants come when you have the basic infrastructure, when you have investors, when they are present in the market, when they know their needs. One of the reasons of the economic concentration that's happening at the brokerage services market is that the process of attracting investors, the process of building the infrastructure is becoming very capital expensive, and private people find it very costly to build the investor base from scratch, and it's not worth it even. And financial advisors in the US manage 10, 15 clients' capital. It can be $15 million. In Kazakhstan, we don't have that clients. We have very few of them and have very small market for the rise of independent consultants. So there should be clients who are not happy with the consultants that they have been working before in the brokerage company, and they should be looking for independent financial consultants, and they would be able to pay a good commission to them, and that's a problem. But the initiative is very interesting. We, of course, support it, and I think this will enable us to increase the responsibility of a big number of people who work around the market, because in our practice, and in Russia too, in Russia the history is a little longer of the market. So we have about 3 million retail investors' accounts in Moscow Stock Exchange. So of course, this market already gave rise to consultants, to private brokers. and especially in the regions where the subsidiaries are, the main objective that the brokers were resolving is that to warn the clients that if they give their assets to be managed by independent consultants, this can be risky as well, especially if these consultants are, are not taking the responsibility. They just play geniuses and start gambling, risking clients' money, trying to make more money because they risk not their money, not their own money. And if you have made 50%, you have got 20% of them. But if you lost, the money was lost by your client. So, the fact that there are no limits, no restrictions, nobody is regulating, overseeing them. They just have their reputation and nothing to lose. So that's very good that we have self-regulating organizations coming up now. We have some quasi-licensing of these activities, some certificates, and responsibility for those independent consultants. Because I would like to repeat that that independent consultant can inflict damage on the client, and of course it should be regulated. Thank you very much. Question from the first row. Good afternoon. Thank you for a very interesting session. My question: how the securities can be protected and how taxation is done? Who should pay at what tax rate and for what period of time? Well, let me answer. Physical entities are exempt from taxes on all financial instruments if they were traded at stock exchange, and not only stock exchange. We have quite favorable taxation. Dividends and the deposit interest is also exempt. Bonds interest exempt. So market value added is also exempt. So we have actually tax hub. And in Russia, they have recently introduced taxation on investment accounts. It is not taxable only if it is in the market for longer than 3 years. So they stimulate long-term investment. As for the security, the accounting of all securities is done by the central depository. Your money is in the bank, and the central depository is owned by the national bank 60%, and the stock exchange owns 20% of it. The translator cannot hear the speaker. If you buy foreign securities, they are also accounted in the central depository. If you buy it abroad, then it will be accounted in the foreign accounting systems, and they will be regulated under their jurisdictions. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to finalize our session. That's the last session of the Astana Economic Forum. I hope it was interesting for all of you. If you have questions, we are ready to answer them. We, as a stock exchange, hold different educational events and plays like stock exchange simulators for students, and we do competitions for retail investors. And Freedom Finance and other brokers also doing training sessions. So you always have a chance to participate privately. All the information is available on our websites. And personally, I would like to thank interesting speakers. Also, we talked about the U.S. because Robert is from the U.S. Next time, we will invite some other representative of other country, maybe Thailand or Malaysia, where there are active measures taken by government to engage retail investors in breeding the culture. Thank you.